Have you ever heard someone whisper your name when no one was there? That's what happened to me deep inside the Oregon wilderness. And I swear, whatever followed us that night wasn't human. It started as a simple college camping trip. 5 of us, me, Ryan, my best friend Jason, his girlfriend Mia, our quiet classmate Ethan, and cheerful newcomer Lila. We'd just finished our second semester at Portland State, and wanted one last adventure before summer jobs swallowed our freedom. Jason had found the spot, Blackwood Forest, an isolated jungle patch near the Columbia River Gorge. Officially, it was closed to the public after a series of disappearances back in the 1990s. But Jason, being the thrill-seeker he was, had said with a grin, "Come on, guys, those are just urban legends. Perfect for a campfire story, right?" I remember Lila's nervous smile when she asked, "People really went missing here?" Jason shrugged. "Yeah, but that was decades ago. Probably got lost. Happens all the time." We all laughed it off back then. Now, I can still hear that laugh echoing in my head, because it was the last time we ever laughed together. We arrived at Blackwood by evening. The sun melted behind the treetops, leaving streaks of red light across the mossy ground. The air was thick, damp, and strangely heavy, like the forest was watching us. The trees were unnaturally tall, their branches twisting above us like skeletal hands. And the deeper we walked, the quieter everything became. No birds. No insects. Just the crunch of our boots on fallen leaves and the occasional snap of twigs. "Creepy as hell," Ethan muttered under his breath. "It's just nature," Jason laughed. "City kids like you aren't used to silence." But this wasn't silence. It was listening silence. We set up camp near a clearing by an old, dry stream bed. Mia started a fire while I helped Ethan with the tents. Lila took pictures for Instagram, before realizing there was no signal. "We're totally off the grid," she sighed. "Good," Jason said, grinning. "Means no one can interrupt our ghost stories." When darkness fell, the forest swallowed everything beyond the firelight. We sat in a tight circle, shadows dancing across our faces. Jason began telling an old local legend he'd read online, the tale of the Watcher of Blackwood. According to him, locals believed a man once lived in this forest, a hunter who disappeared after his family died in a fire. They said his spirit still wandered here, protecting the woods from trespassers. Sometimes, campers claim to hear his footsteps, or find their tents ripped open overnight. And sometimes, they saw him. A tall figure. Wearing a deer skull over his head. Mia shivered and threw a stick at Jason. "Stop it, you're freaking Lila out." Lila forced a smile. "I'm fine, but this place really does feel strange." I remember glancing into the trees then. Something about the darkness seemed to move, like shadows breathing. And that's when I heard it. Soft. Barely audible. A whisper that seemed to crawl through the night air. "Ryan." I froze. It wasn't Jason, Mia, or anyone from the circle. They were all looking at the fire. Did someone just... "What?" Mia asked. "Nothing, thought I heard something." I told myself it was the wind. But the wind doesn't know your name. Later that night, as everyone went to sleep, I lay awake in my tent. The fire had burned down to embers, and the forest felt alive again, rustling, shifting, breathing around us. Then I heard footsteps. Slow. Crunching leaves just outside. I peeked through the flap. Nothing. Just darkness. The sound circled the tents once. Twice. Then stopped, right behind mine. I held my breath. Something brushed against the fabric, like a hand. Then a voice, low and raspy, whispered. "You shouldn't have come here." My blood turned to ice. I ripped open the tent zipper and shone my flashlight into the trees. But there was no one there. Only the faint impression of muddy footprints leading into the forest. Bare human feet. The next morning, sunlight crept through the canopy, but even that light felt dim, muted, as if the forest didn't want to be seen clearly. I hadn't slept a minute. My mind kept replaying the sound of those footsteps, that whisper right outside my tent. When Jason crawled out of his tent, stretching and yawning, I immediately told him what I'd heard. He just laughed, brushing off the story like it was a prank. Probably some animal, dude. Coyotes, raccoons, hell, maybe even a deer. But when I showed him the footprints, bare, human-shaped, pressed deep into the mud, his smirk faded just a little. He crouched down, ran his hand over the print, and said quietly, "Huh, weird. Could be from an old hiker or something." Ethan, who had been listening, frowned. "A hiker? Out here? The park's been closed for decades." Nobody replied. We decided to forget it, or at least pretend to. The air was heavy that morning, no one talked much as we made breakfast. Lila was humming softly to herself while trying to light the stove when she suddenly stopped and stared into the woods. Did you guys hear that?" she whispered. We all froze. I strained my ears, but heard nothing. "It sounded like someone humming the same tune," she said. "Right behind me." Jason forced a laugh to cut through the tension, but his voice cracked slightly. "You're just echoing off the trees. These woods mess with sound." But even he didn't look convinced. By noon, we decided to hike deeper in, searching for a nearby waterfall Jason had marked on his GPS. The deeper we went, the more unnatural the forest felt. The trees grew closer together, their roots twisting like veins over the forest floor. Every few minutes, we'd hear something move, branches cracking, leaves rustling, but whenever we turned, there was nothing. Then, we found something that made all of us stop. A small clearing. At its center stood a totem, roughly carved from a tree trunk, about 6 feet tall. It was shaped like a man wearing a deer skull, its wooden eyes hollow, its arms outstretched as if in warning. Around its base were bones. Dozens of them. Animal bones, mostly. I hoped. Lila covered her mouth. "Jesus Christ, what the hell is this?" Ethan stepped forward, squinting. "Looks like some kind of ritual symbol. Maybe Native American?" But I noticed something else. One of the bones wasn't like the others. It was too long. Too straight. A human femur. Before I could say anything, Jason kicked the bones aside with a nervous laugh. "Fake crap. Someone's idea of a prank. We'll head back after the waterfall, all right?" Mia grabbed his arm. "Jason, I don't think we should be here." He shook her off. "Relax. It's fine." We reached the waterfall an hour later. It was beautiful, tall, shimmering, spilling into a pool surrounded by mossy rocks. But even there, that same eerie feeling followed us. Like the trees had eyes. While the others rested, I wandered to the edge of the pool. The water was crystal clear, reflecting the forest canopy above. I crouched down, splashing my face, trying to shake the unease out of my head. That's when I saw it, just below the surface, near my reflection. A handprint. Pressed against the rock underwater. Human. Pale. As if someone had pressed it there and never moved again. I stumbled back, heart hammering. "Guys. Come look at." But my voice froze in my throat. Ethan was standing at the water's edge, staring at his arm. A dark, smeared shape was spreading across his skin, muddy, almost like a handprint, the same size as the one underwater. "It burns," he hissed. "It feels like it's under my skin." Lila rushed toward him, but when she touched the mark, she flinched. "It's hot. Like fever hot." We tried scrubbing it off with water, but the mark wouldn't fade. It almost looked like it was sinking into his skin, darkening to a deep, blood-red symbol. Mia was crying now, begging Jason to leave. Jason's face had lost all its color. He finally nodded. "All right. We'll pack up and head back to the car." As we turned to leave the clearing, the air suddenly changed. The birds, what few we'd heard, went silent again. The wind stopped. And then, from behind us, came that same whisper I'd heard last night. Only this time, all of us heard it. You shouldn't have come here. We spun around. The trees were empty. But the totem we'd seen earlier, it wasn't where we'd left it. It was standing at the edge of the clearing now, facing us. And around its base, the bones had rearranged themselves into a perfect circle. We ran. No one said a word, we just ran until our lungs burned and the trees blurred into a wall of green. Every few seconds, someone would glance behind, but there was nothing there, nothing except the forest closing in tighter, as if the trees themselves were moving closer together. When we finally stopped, gasping and drenched in sweat, I realized something that froze my blood. The clearing where we'd camped was gone. Jason took out his phone and checked the GPS, his hands trembling. "This can't be right," he muttered. The map showed we were still near the campsite, but all around us were endless lines of green, no trail, no markers, no sign of where we'd come from. "It's like we're walking in circles," Ethan said through gritted teeth, his arm still burning from that strange mark. Lila clung to him, tears streaking her cheeks. "We've been walking north the whole time. How can we end up here again?" No one answered, because the truth was clear, the forest wasn't just dense, it was alive. It was shifting. Changing itself around us. We decided to rest and regroup, sitting on a fallen tree. The woods were silent again, suffocatingly silent. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Mia broke the stillness, whispering, "Ryan, that thing you heard last night, what did it sound like?" I swallowed hard before answering. It was like a man whispering my name. But the voice, it was close, too close, almost inside the tent. Jason shook his head violently. "We're all just spooking ourselves. There's got to be an explanation, magnetic interference, echoing sounds, something." Ethan shot him a cold look. "Then explain this." He pulled back his sleeve, showing the mark again. It had grown darker, the edges now cracked and oozing a blackish fluid. "It's not a burn. It's like it's spreading." We wrapped it with Mia's scarf, but nothing seemed to help. Lila tried to lighten the mood by suggesting we should try heading east, toward the river. "If we follow the water," she said, "it has to lead somewhere." It was the only plan we had, so we followed the sound of trickling water deeper into the forest. But the further we walked, the more wrong everything felt. The trees began to look different. Some were marked with strange carvings, symbols, circles, and lines burned into the bark. Others had faces, faint outlines like screaming mouths etched into the wood. And there was the smell, foul and earthy, like something had been rotting in the ground for years. After what felt like hours, we finally reached the river. But it wasn't the same one Jason's map had shown. The water here was black, thick, and unmoving, like oil. The air above it shimmered faintly, and when Ethan leaned close, he whispered, "It's warm." I felt a pulse in my chest, the same rhythm as the faint ripples on the surface. That's when we saw the reflection. Not ours, someone else's. Behind us, in the water's mirror, stood a tall figure. It wore something over its head, something white and curved, like the skull of an animal. Before we could turn around, the reflection smiled. Lila screamed. We all spun around, but there was nothing there, just trees and mist. Jason lost it. He started shouting at the forest, "Come out! Show yourself, you coward!" His voice echoed, bouncing from tree to tree until it sounded like a dozen people shouting back. Then, one of those echoes laughed. We froze. The laughter was soft, wrong, too human to be the wind. And it was coming closer. I grabbed Lila's hand and hissed, "Run!" We bolted again, crashing through branches and thorns until we stumbled into another clearing. At the center lay something impossible, a pile of our own things. The tents. The cooler. Even the half-burned firewood from our camp. It was all here, as if someone, or something, had moved it for us. Jason's voice cracked. We left this miles away. How is it here? Ethan staggered forward, clutching his arm. It doesn't matter. We need to. He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes went wide. Then he screamed. We watched in horror as the mark on his arm began to writhe, literally move under his skin. Veins bulged, twisting into a spiral, and something dark pushed out from beneath. A root, black and thin, burst through his flesh. Mia screamed. Jason tried to grab it, but Ethan pushed him away, eyes wild with pain. "It's inside me. Get it off." He fell to the ground, convulsing, dirt spraying as he clawed at his arm. The roots spread up to his neck, pulsing with each heartbeat. Then, just as suddenly, he went still. For a moment, we thought he'd passed out, until his eyes opened again. But they weren't his eyes anymore. They were completely black. He stood, slow and trembling, his voice hoarse and distant. "He's coming." Before we could move, Ethan turned toward the woods and walked into the darkness, his body stiff and unyielding. We tried to chase him, but he vanished, swallowed whole by the trees. And then, from somewhere deep in the forest, a horn blew, low, ancient, echoing through the valley. The sound didn't just fill the air. It filled us. And in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. We were not lost in this forest. We were being herded. Night fell faster than it should have. One moment there was dim gray light filtering through the canopy, and the next, darkness swallowed the forest whole. It was as if the sun had been ripped from the sky. Jason managed to relight a small fire with the last of our matches, his hands shaking so badly he dropped the lighter twice before the flames caught. The fire crackled weakly, its glow barely reaching beyond the circle of our faces. No one spoke for a long time. We just sat there, listening to the forest breathe. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. Every shifting shadow felt alive. Finally, Mia broke the silence, her voice thin and trembling. "We can't stay here. We have to find Ethan. He could be hurt." "Ethan's gone," Jason snapped. "You saw what happened to him. He wasn't even human anymore." Lila's voice rose in anger. "So what? You want to just leave him out there?" Jason didn't answer. He just stared into the fire, his jaw tight, eyes hollow. I wanted to say something, anything to break the suffocating dread closing in around us, but before I could, a branch cracked somewhere beyond the circle of light. We all turned our heads toward the sound. Then another crack. Closer this time. Jason raised the flashlight and swept it across the trees. "Ethan," he called out, his voice quivering. "If that's you, say something." Nothing. Only silence. Then, faintly, a shuffle of movement. The beam of the flashlight caught something between the trees, a flash of white, smooth and curved. For a moment, I thought it was a piece of bone. Then it moved. Slowly. Deliberately. The shape lifted as if it were looking right at us, and the hollow sockets of a deer skull stared back. Jason cursed and dropped the flashlight. The light spun across the ground, and in that instant of chaos, we heard the voice again. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was louder, heavier, resonating through the air like a growl formed of breath and wind. "Leave my woods." Lila screamed and stumbled back. I grabbed her before she fell into the fire. Jason snatched the flashlight and pointed it back at the trees, but the figure was gone. All that remained was the faint rustle of branches and a cold wind that smelled like wet soil and decay. "We're leaving," Jason said. "Now." No one argued. We packed whatever we could in the dark, our bags, the half-burned map, the food, and started moving in the direction we thought would lead us out. The trees seemed closer now, their trunks warped and twisted, roots snaking above the ground like veins. The deeper we went, the more distorted everything became. At one point, Mia stopped and pointed ahead. "Jason, do you see that?" Up ahead, in the gloom, the trees weren't trees anymore, they were poles, lined in a perfect circle, each one carved with those same strange symbols we'd seen before. Hanging from the branches were things that made my stomach turn, animal skulls, bundles of feathers, scraps of clothing that looked human. "This isn't real," Lila whispered. "It can't be real." But it was. Because hanging from one of the branches, half hidden in shadow, was Ethan's backpack. Jason moved forward to grab it, but as soon as he stepped into the circle, every symbol on the poles began to glow. A deep red light pulsed through the carvings like veins filling with blood. Then came the sound, like chanting, distant but growing closer, dozens of voices murmuring words we couldn't understand. Mia clutched my arm. "Ryan, something's moving in there." And she was right. Inside the circle, between the glowing poles, the air itself seemed to twist and ripple. The space shimmered like heat over asphalt, and from within that distortion, a figure stepped out. It was Ethan. But not the Ethan we knew. His skin was pale, stretched thin over his bones. Black veins crawled up his neck, and his eyes were still pitch black. He smiled when he saw us, a slow, unnatural smile that didn't belong to a human face. "He's awake now," Ethan said softly. "The Watcher sees you." Jason raised the flashlight, but before he could move, Ethan lifted his hand, and every light in the clearing, our flashlights, our phones, even the faint glow from the fire behind us, died all at once. Total darkness swallowed us. We heard the sound of something large moving, branches snapping, heavy footsteps circling us. The chanting grew louder, echoing from every direction, even though there was no one there. It wasn't just in the air, it was inside our heads. Then came the horn again. Deep. Ancient. The ground beneath us trembled. And in the faint flicker of dying light, I saw it. Behind Ethan, rising out of the earth, was something massive. Its body was draped in moss and mud, its limbs long and thin like twisted roots. And atop its shoulders, gleaming in the dim red glow, was a deer skull. The Watcher of Blackwood was no legend. It was real. And it had found us. Jason grabbed my arm and shouted, "Run!" But the sound of our footsteps was drowned out by the horn's unearthly call. As we fled, I glanced back once, and saw Ethan standing perfectly still in the center of the glowing circle, the Watcher's bony hand resting gently on his shoulder like a father claiming his son. We ran until our legs gave out. The forest didn't end, it stretched endlessly, swallowing us whole. Every direction looked the same, every tree mirrored the last. My lungs burned, and my heart hammered so violently it drowned out every other sound. When we finally stopped, collapsing near a fallen log, I realized Mia wasn't with us. "Where's Mia?" I gasped. Lila spun in circles, eyes wide, tears cutting through the dirt on her face. She was right behind me. I swear she was. Jason started shouting her name, his voice breaking as it echoed through the trees. "Mia! Mia!" The sound came back distorted, like 100 voices calling it back in mocking tones. Then, silence. And from that silence came a faint cry, Mia's voice, calling out weakly, "Help, me." It came from somewhere ahead. Jason bolted before I could stop him. Lila and I followed, crashing through the underbrush until we stumbled into another clearing. At first glance, it looked like another campsite. But as we stepped closer, my stomach twisted. It wasn't a camp, it was a graveyard. Wooden crosses, dozens of them, scattered across the clearing. Some were broken, others half buried under roots. Hanging from a few of them were rusted name tags, faded with time. I leaned closer and brushed the dirt off one. Missing, 1993. And another, found, 1994. And then one that made my blood freeze, Ethan Miles, 2023. Jason fell to his knees, his voice barely a whisper. They knew we were coming. Before I could respond, we heard movement behind one of the crosses. Mia crawled into view, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. Her hands were covered in mud, her clothes torn. "He's here," she whispered. "He's under the ground. He wants all of us." We rushed to her, but she grabbed my wrist so hard it hurt. "You have to listen, Ryan," she said, trembling. "This place, it's not a forest. It's a grave. The trees, they're growing from people." Jason and I exchanged a horrified look, but before we could ask, she pointed at the nearest tree. Its bark had peeled away in places, revealing what looked like pale wood underneath, except it wasn't wood. It was bone. The tree wasn't growing around something human. It was something human. That's when the ground began to shake again, the same deep, rhythmic pulse we'd felt when the horn first sounded. Lila screamed as roots erupted from the soil, writhing like snakes. One coiled around her ankle and yanked her off her feet. Jason lunged and pulled her back, hacking at the root with his pocket knife until it split open, oozing black fluid that smelled like rotten iron. From that wound in the ground, something began to rise. Slowly. Enormously. The Watcher. Its antlered skull glistened in the dim light, its body stitched together from bark, mud, and sinew. It moved with an ancient, impossible grace, as if the forest itself bent to its will. Its hollow eye sockets turned toward us, and that voice, low, guttural, and ancient, filled the clearing. You took from the roots. Now the roots take you. Jason raised the knife, shouting like a madman. You're not real. The Watcher's head tilted, almost curious. Then one massive hand reached forward and swept Jason off his feet like a rag doll. He hit a tree with a sickening crack and didn't move again. Lila screamed his name, crawling toward him, but I dragged her back. We can't save him. I yelled, tears blurring my vision. The ground split open wider, and through the crack, I saw them, faces. Countless human faces twisted in agony beneath the soil, mouths open in silent screams. The roots moved through them, feeding. Mia grabbed my arm again. The totem, she gasped. It's the heart. Destroy it and it dies. The totem, the wooden statue we saw on the first day. I remembered the way it moved on its own. It wasn't just a symbol, it was the Watcher's anchor. We ran, following Mia's desperate lead through the maze of trees until we burst into another clearing, the same one from before. The totem stood there again, taller now, its wooden arms spread wide. At its base, the bones we'd seen had turned to ash, swirling like dust around it. Ethan stood beside it, his black eyes glowing faintly red. You shouldn't have come here, he said again, that eerie calm in his voice. He only wakes for the marked ones. Mia didn't hesitate. She ran at the totem, holding Jason's knife, screaming as she drove the blade into the wood. The air erupted with a deafening roar. Ethan shrieked, collapsing as black smoke poured from his mouth. The totem cracked, splitting down the center. The Watcher's voice filled the air once more, angry now, distorted, shaking the ground. You cannot kill what feeds eternity. The trees around us caught fire, not red, but a cold, ghostly blue flame that didn't burn the ground but devoured the light instead. Mia screamed as the roots wrapped around her legs, pulling her toward the totem. I grabbed her hands, pulling with everything I had. Don't let go. I shouted, but she looked at me with a strange calm, tears in her eyes. You have to run, Ryan. Before I could answer, the ground split open beneath her. The roots yanked her down, and she was gone. I stumbled back as the totem finally collapsed, splitting into pieces. The forest went still. The chanting stopped. The light faded. The Watcher's form dissolved into mist and scattered into the darkness. When dawn finally came, I was alone. Lila was gone. Jason was gone. Only silence remained. I walked until the trees thinned, until I stumbled out onto an old, abandoned road and collapsed. When I woke up, it was days later, in a hospital. They said I was found wandering near the edge of Blackwood, dehydrated, delirious. I told them what happened. They didn't believe me. The park rangers went to search the site. They found nothing, no totem, no bodies, no signs of anyone else. Just the ashes of an old campfire, and one thing buried in the dirt. A wooden antler. The ranger handed it to me in a sealed evidence bag, asking if it meant anything. I didn't answer. But when I touched the glass, I could swear I heard it again. A faint whisper, curling through the back of my mind. You shouldn't have come here. And this time, the whisper laughed.